deal with, not only as far as the pandemic is concerned, but he's also undertaken an energy initiative, because eventually, when this all ends, we'll have to restart our economy. Premier, thank you very much for taking the time, and let me start by asking you for your reaction to President Trump's declaration that N95 masks and ventilators should stay in the United States and not come to Canada.
It's extremely disappointing, Roy. This is a country that Canada that has always stood by the United States. We did so after 9/11. We made a real sacrifice to join with the United States in defending their national security as well as ours. And we've done that all through our history. You know, it kind of reminded me of the beginning of the Second World War, when Canada was a part of the fight against global fascism, being led by Britain. And the Americans sat out the first 2.5 years of that war. Not only that, but for much of that time, they wouldn't even supply Canada or Britain with materiel. And this reminds me of that. Now, I obviously hope that the president rethinks this and realizes that we are allies together. We've always been together through tough times in history, and we should be through this tough time in history.
What can you tell us, Premier, about the conference call with the Prime Minister and the other premiers? How did that go? How much cooperation is there among you all?
Remarkably good cooperation right across the country and across party lines. Politics has all been put aside and regionalism put aside for us to focus together on defeating this invisible enemy of the coronavirus. I'm actually quite moved by the sense of solidarity on display as we meet as premiers and with the national government. You know, Alberta is going through a triple whammy. Not only are we facing the biggest public health crisis since the Spanish flu in 1918 and the global coronavirus recession, but on top of that, we're seeing a meltdown in our largest industry, Canada's largest industry subsector, the oil and gas sector, which is responsible for employing about 800,000 Canadians directly and indirectly. And obviously, the collapse in energy prices brought on in part by the collapse in demand because of the coronavirus, but also it's been amplified by the Russian-Saudi oil price war. This has very grave implications for the people of Alberta. It means that the economic downturn the rest of the country is seeing is probably twice as serious in my province. It also means it will take a lot longer for Alberta to recover from this downturn, the likes of which we have not seen since the Great Depression. And I just wanted to say how I've been touched, almost basically been quite emotionally moved to hear constant expressions of support and solidarity from premiers across the country who understand the unique adversity that Alberta is facing right now.
So, and you've faced this adversity and an escalating adversity for some period of time. But you've invested or will invest $7.5 billion in Keystone XL from Alberta to Nebraska. You're clearly confident this is a sound investment, that oil prices will rebound, and that the United States, even if it elects a Democrat president, won't be slamming the door on the Keystone routing, with construction then already underway by a good 6 months before the next president is sworn in. Would you just, for the benefit of all of us, explain to us what exactly your government is doing and just the rationale behind the move?
Sure. Just for those not aware, Keystone XL is a proposed enlargement of a pipeline that's existed between Canada and the U.S. Midwest for many years. It's been on the books for a decade. TransCanada Pipelines, now called TC Energy, has already invested $6 billion in it. But it became a political football, and ultimately, under pressure from the Green Left that's been trying to landlock Canadian energy, President Obama vetoed the project, and since then, President Trump granted a permit, but it's been subject to constant legal harassment. The same groups that killed the Northern Gateway Pipeline, killed Energy East, have endlessly delayed the Trans Mountain Pipeline, that were standing on train tracks to protest the Coastal GasLink project. The same movement, backed by the same foreign funders, have been behind trying to shut down the proposed Keystone XL Pipeline. Well, what we did this week, after 8 months of careful negotiations, was to remove the political risk for TC Energy to proceed on the financial side. They needed because the capital markets were not prepared to backstop that project. Private investors were not going to risk their money in a situation that has become so heavily politicized, partly because of concern that a future U.S. president might repeal the permit to allow it to proceed, and because of the current meltdown in energy markets. So we needed to step forward with an investment on behalf of the government of Alberta. We're putting in $1.5 billion as a equity investment with preferred shares this year to begin construction. It started this week, April 1, and next year we're offering a $6 billion loan guarantee to help the company finance the rest of the construction. It is planned to come into operation on June of 2023, and will allow us to ship at least 830,000 barrels of additional Canadian oil to the U.S. Gulf Coast refineries that will, we estimate, generate a net $30 billion in additional revenues for Canadian governments. So this is, you're right, there is risk involved in this, but we're sending a message to the green left foreign-funded special interests that have tried so desperately to landlock our energy, and we're sending a message to OPEC, the Saudis and the Russians that are trying to drive North America out of the global energy markets right now, that they will not prevail, that we will do whatever it takes to ensure a future for our economy and for our workers.
I don't see that you had any alternative. Now, there are op-ed writers, and we know the PMO has told us they're always available, but there are op-ed writers who've taken a run at you over this, but I don't see how Alberta had any alternative. And ultimately, as you say, it's a $30 billion investment for the good of this country when our economy starts to move forward again.
Yeah, and Roy, since the federal government bought the Trans Mountain Expansion project because of the legal and political uncertainty created by the same foreign-funded and special interests, Kinder Morgan, the proponent of that project, walked away. The federal government, I appreciate it, they stepped in to keep that project alive. But we are not going to bet the future of Alberta's economy on the prospect of that one project proceeding. One of the reasons we are so uniquely vulnerable to this predatory dumping of oil on global markets by the Saudis and Russians right now is because we do not have global access. We are still, we have the third largest oil reserves on Earth. The largest is Venezuela, then Saudi, then Alberta, then Canada, through Alberta, and after that Russia, and so on. So this is an asset for which there is going to be significant global demand for decades to come, even as the world moves to alternative forms of energy. We are talking here about hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars of wealth, hundreds of thousands of jobs, tens of billions of dollars of government revenue for healthcare and education, and a path for us in this part of the country to continue diversifying our economy. But it will not happen by accident. The investment that we made this week was an indication of Alberta taking control of our economic destiny. I'm a market guy. I'm not prone to government intervention, obviously, in things like this by nature. But the failure to get pipelines built out of Canada to generate hundreds of billions of dollars of value is not a market failure. It is a failure of politics. And so I concluded that we need, if politics has killed and stunted pipelines, then we may need political engagement to get one built.
Okay, Premier, one more question for you. Talk to us about the initiatives that you've undertaken as far as the pandemic is concerned and countering people who still, oddly enough, seem to believe that it's okay to go out and just have some fun.
Yeah, I can't believe anybody is still acting that way. And there's good and bad coming out of this crisis, right? Let me start with the bad. We've seen examples of price gouging, of fraud operations targeting vulnerable seniors around the COVID crisis. We've seen people ignoring the public health orders to self-isolate and engage in social distancing. And all I can say to those folks who are either willfully or ignoring the crisis, who are engaging in behavior that could spread the disease, or worse yet, who are seeking to exploit it, shame on them. But I think those irresponsible people are massively outweighed by the millions of points of light that we see, the remarkable response to everything as simple as delivering groceries for shut-in seniors next door, to the outpouring of support for charities like food banks and homeless shelters, to the private sector companies who are converting their production facilities to produce personal protective equipment and ventilators, to just so many random acts of kindness and compassion. I think we're really pulling together as Canadians. And so I do want to reinforce, please, folks, if you can stay home, in every event, please follow the public health orders in your provinces. Wash your hands, maintain those hygiene protocols, be particularly mindful of the elderly, the frail, and those who are sick. And together we're going to get through this.
You know, I have an unusual sense of humor, Premier, right? You've run into that before. So I was thinking yesterday while I was washing my hands, if you have a problem with that, people, just think of it this way. You're waterboarding the virus. So.
There you go. Waterboarding the invisible enemy.
Premier Kenney, good talking to you always. Thank you for the time.
Thanks for what you're doing, Roy.
All the best. Premier Jason Kenney of Alberta on the Roy Green Show on the Chorus Radio Network. By the way, violation of the Public Health Act of Alberta may result in